So good evening. Like Natalia said, my name is Ashley Cook Plymouth, and I am the Director of Literacy, Language, which means world and classical languages in city schools, and culture, which encompasses social studies curriculum, fine arts curriculum, English language arts curriculum, any of the foreign languages that our schools offer from grades kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. I am fairly new in this role, and also in following Natalia and Tyrone's footsteps. I have been an educator in Baltimore City for 14 years. I started off as a 5th and 6th grade English language arts teacher at William Paca Elementary in East Baltimore. And from that role, I did a teacher fellow position in the central office back 7 years ago when we had first started doing our own district grown curriculum. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I take us through our journey to where we are today. And then I just previously left the principalship for 3.5 years at the Mount Washington School. And now I'm here in the director role back at central office. So super pleased and grateful that Natalia and Rebecca reached out to be able to share some time with you all today and inform you a little bit about our new curriculum for kindergarten through 8th grade. And then also, are there any parents of 9th through 12th graders or teachers of 9th and 12th grade? So we are yet to have a new 9-12 curriculum. However, we are doing some revisions in anticipation that this year we will do the same engagement process and feedback process to adopt a new high school curriculum for English language arts for 1920. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So I'm going to kind of just go through a little bit our journey of where we've been as a district as it relates to English language arts curriculum, especially as we adopted the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards about 7 years ago. But before we start that journey, I want to ground us in the blueprint for success. Any teachers or parents or young people in the audience, have you heard about the blueprint? Okay, so a few of us, all right? So for those of us who may be a little unfamiliar with the blueprint, you can switch to the next slide, Natalia. I'm pretty sure you'll hear a lot about it this year. Our blueprint for success is exactly what it is. It's our blueprint. It's our guidepost, our strategy for building a generation. When Dr. Santelises came back to the district almost a year, 2 years ago now as CEO, she put together a team of stakeholders that really focused and built upon research from other urban districts, other successful districts, both nationally and abroad, to identify what are 3 priority areas that us as a district need to commit to ensure that when young people leave Baltimore City Public Schools, they are ready to be productive citizens in our community, centrally or locally, but also our community abroad. So how do we develop students in their literacy skills? How do we develop and ensure that when we are engaging with students that we are taking a lens of wholeness? So recognizing that our children come to us with multiple talents and gifts, that our families come to us with multiple talents and gifts. How do we cultivate that? How do we raise that up? And then the third priority is around leadership. So how do we develop the leaders in our school, not just the principal or folks who hold actual titles of leadership, but how do we encourage and cultivate the leaders within our schools as our teachers and them leading from their seats? How do we develop our young people to become leaders and advocates and agents for themselves? So our blueprint has those 3 priority areas: literacy, wholeness, and leadership. And within the literacy lens of our blueprint, one of the charges that it calls for is that in order to provide access and equity for our young folks in Baltimore, our young people, our young citizens in Baltimore, we need to ensure that we are holding a high expectation for every child, that we are engaging them in curriculum that is rigorous, that is standards aligned, and most importantly, provides them opportunities to not only see themselves in what they read, write about, engage in visually. That's not my phone though, is it? Okay, give me a heart attack. But how do we get them to see themselves in what they engage in, regardless if it's their English language arts classroom, their science classroom, their arts classroom? How do we engage them in that and equip them with the currency of literacy, of being a literate individual to access the world that's larger than a schoolhouse that's larger than Baltimore City, that's larger than Maryland. So as a part of our Blueprint for Literacy, it really called, and we had to think about centrally, are we providing right now the most rigorous standards-aligned curriculum for English language arts for our young folks? If you had been following the curriculum audit and the curriculum adoption over the last year, we began this launch of acquiring a new curriculum by having an audit of our existing curriculum. 7 years ago, when Maryland did decide to adopt the Common Core standards, there weren't any vendors out there like a Pearson or Houghton Mifflin or some of the other big vendors that had curricula that were aligned to the standards because the standards are super new. And Maryland was one of the first states that adopted the Common Core standards, which meant as a district, and at that time I was grateful to be in teaching and learning, we needed to find a curriculum or create our own curriculum that was going to start to tackle and address those standards, because we knew as a central office that our children couldn't wait. Our children couldn't wait, our teachers couldn't wait for a vendor to create these curriculum materials. So we devised or created a group of teacher writers at the time, and those teacher writers did the best they could with the knowledge that was available to us as public educators with the adoption of the new curriculum. And we created a K-8 curriculum actually a K-12 curriculum, that was topic and thematic based, that was aligned to the standards, but again, that was at an infancy of when the standards were adopted. So we've had 2 audits in the last 7 years that revealed that our curriculum was a good try, it was a good stab, our homegrown curriculum, right? That you could tell there were tasks that were standards aligned. For most parts, there were complex texts. So children were reading texts that were challenging them, not that weren't completely watered down, but we definitely had some gaps and some holes. So fast forward to this school year. Now that as a field, we are more knowledgeable about what the standards mean and what it means to meet those standards, there have been additional curriculum vendors who have created standards-aligned curriculum. So we launched a request for proposal this past winter and received about 15 to 20 different vendors that submitted curriculum programs. And after a couple of months of engagement sessions where we solicited feedback from teachers, from parents, from community partners, from school leaders, from children, we landed on a new K-8 curriculum adoption titled Wit and Wisdom. Part of that curriculum, so you could switch, sorry, as we were trying to consider and think about what is it that our children deserve to have and see and experience in the curriculum, but also what is it that our teachers deserve and have and experience in teaching this curriculum. You can go back one more, sorry. I'm going ahead of my slides, thanks Natalia. Were some of these factors. We knew that if we were going to invest heavily and financially in a curriculum program that was packaged for us, that we needed to make sure that our teachers had easy access and it was usable for our teachers so that they weren't spending multiple hours trying to pull from other resources like Teachers Pay Teachers, Google, spending their time pulling resources. We wanted to make sure that we had something that was comprehensive in nature that allowed for them to just be able to go through and prepare, so they could prepare for the day as opposed to spending hours planning and pulling materials. So usability was a factor. We also knew that we wanted a curriculum that was culturally relevant. So culturally relevant within content, but also knowing that it needed to be able to foster opportunities for culturally relevant pedagogy. So within our new curriculum, we were looking for opportunities, again, where children had mirrors so they could see themselves in different contexts, but also windows into seeing other cultures. And then also that would spark their interest and create doors of how do we bridge my culture and these other cultures that I'm studying. So cultural relevance was a consideration. Opportunities for professional development for our teachers was also a consideration. So we wanted to partner with a curriculum program and vendor that could provide those opportunities to help our teachers become experts. Because one of our charges in the Blueprint for Literacy is to create experts within our teachers. Some of the other pieces, we wanted to make sure it had educative features, which is a tool to support teachers as they are learning and unpacking the new curriculum. It was also important that we had a curriculum that could meet all the needs of all learners. So our English language learners, our students with disabilities, our gifted and advanced learners, so a curriculum that had potential to open up those avenues for all our continuum of learners. And then the last piece that was really, really important and a right of our children, but really important to a lot of the teacher feedback that we heard, is a curriculum that was comprehensive enough that had the writing process, skills around grammar usage and mechanics embedded within it as well. Our K-8 teachers, in the past couple of years, have had to go to different programs to deliver an ELA curriculum. They had to go one place for writing curriculum, one place for reading, and another place for the foundational skills, so the phonics and the phonemic awareness pieces. So we really wanted to find a curriculum, that was comprehensive and had all of those and valued all of those standards equally with balance. Now you can go. Thank you. And so as a part of our engagement series and part of our kind of think abouts and considerations, we landed with Wit and Wisdom, which is our K-8 curriculum for next school year. This slide just highlights some of the strengths that we found and by the we, I'm being collective in the sense of some of the feedback that we received from folks in our engagement series, some of the strengths of this curriculum, so that there was alignment K-8. So that if I'm at a K-8 school, if I'm a K-8 principal, teacher, parent, I know that what my child experiences in kindergarten in terms of routines and structures will build upon by the time they leave in 8th grade. This was really also important in terms of district-wide expectations. We needed a curriculum and a program that was ready to be launched district-wide. So that if we think about that usability factor, that it wasn't going to take multiple resources for teachers to have to peruse through and go through, that we would be able to adopt a program like Wit and Wisdom that was ready for district-wide implementation. They could meet the needs of our 180 schools and programs. There was also, this was component is probably one of my favorite features, the opportunities for arts integration and alignment across content areas. So fine arts is one of the departments that I am fortunate to be able to oversee and supervise. But as we think about the whole child, many of our children are super talented and have gifts in arts, right? So they're musically talented, they're visually talented. And within Wit and Wisdom, visual arts and art pieces are considered text. So as your students kindergarten through 8th grade are in their ELA classroom, not only will they read novels and engage in watching videos as text and speeches as text, they will analyze pieces of art and works of art as text. Yes?
Question. So are we completely done with Springboard? Is that done, over with altogether? Or is that still?
That's a really great question. So we are in a transition with Springboard. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Springboard, so Springboard is a curriculum program that's a part of the College Board. And the way that we've used it in city schools for the last few years is as the honors curriculum for our students that are in honors classes. The reason why I said that we're in transition, we have some schools who are deciding this year that they want to do Wit and Wisdom for all their students, whether it's honors or non-honors. Those who are not using that option, for our 8th graders that are in honors, they have to have a grade above. Wit and Wisdom currently doesn't go to high school, so there are some schools who are going to be using the 9th grade Springboard as that option. And then as we look to adopt our next high school curricula, that might have some implications on where Springboard stands. So thanks for asking that. Yes?
So you're describing this as a new curriculum, so is this to replace whatever the curriculum is there now?
Yes.
So what is the curriculum that's here?
Yep, thank you. That's a great question too. So yes, this is new in terms of it'll be the first year of implementation in 2 weeks when children return back. So what is in place now for our K-8 is our district created curriculum. So that was the one that I was talking about that 7 years ago. It was developed. There's been some revisions and some tweaks, but it was teacher created. And based off our audit, definitely had some areas for growth. And then based on some of the feedback that we received from folks, there was this need of going with a curriculum that had been packaged and vetted by expert writers. So this will replace our district-grown curriculum. The district-created curriculum will still exist for this school year for our 9-12 as we look to adopt a new curriculum for high school in 1920. School year 1920. Yes, ma'am.
Are we still
Also a great question. So our Wit and Wisdom is a core curriculum for reading, writing, language, and speaking. For our students in kindergarten through second grade, their foundational skills block, so that's their early word study and their phonics and phonemic awareness. Foundations is the core program for phonics and phonemic awareness for that pairs with Wit and Wisdom, excuse me. And then I think one of the other strong characteristics of Wit and Wisdom and compared to some of the other curricula that we viewed was the opportunity for the strong parent resources. So Natalia shared that one of the handouts that you might have picked up was the first grade parent tip sheet. Within Wit and Wisdom, they have already produced parent tip sheets for all 4 modules of every single grade. So I do have some other samples of all the grades K to 8 here. And this was really big to us because as we heard from teachers and school leaders and parents that there's this need and want for understanding what's going on in my child's ELA class. And for the most part, depending on what school you went to or what teacher you might have even had within a school, that was dependent upon what the teacher was producing and making available or what the school was producing and making available. Wit and Wisdom has this already for us. And one of the things that we're working on centrally is finding a way to make it accessible electronically. That way, as parents, you don't have to worry about the school printing them off and giving them to you. So where we are kind of like logistically right now is how do we capture and what's the best place to capture on the city schools website so that all parents have access to all 4 modules for whichever grade that you'd be interested in. And again, this was a really big piece for us because as we know and as a part of our blueprint that this building a generation of success is not solely on the schools, right? That we need to have these strong school community partnerships. And if you all aren't informed about what instruction is going on, then we can't help support one another. Yes?
Just about language access, therapy, those resources offered in different languages.
So currently, Wit and Great Minds, which is the parent company of Wit and Wisdom, they have the parent tip resources accessible in Spanish. And we are working with our differentiated learning office and resources to find ways to translate some of the parent tip resources in the other languages that are present in our schools, since Spanish and English aren't the only 2 languages that are spoken amongst our families. But right now, they're currently available in English and Spanish.
Since this is K through 8, and we're going to have one developed for 9 through 12, will this align so that as they leave 8th grade and they move into 9 through 12, will this align so that once they get to the 9th grade, they will be able to still pick up on the content?
Yep, so that's a great question. So what will align and what doesn't change and what the curriculum is not going to change is the scope of standards. So the standards that Maryland has adopted, K-12, are staying the same. What we are hopeful, and we will see how this pans out as we engage in adopting a 9-12 curriculum, is that whatever that 9-12 potential curriculum would be, that in terms of like topics and themes, that it will be a build upon what we find in Wit and Wisdom. I think I have like, 1 minute? So in this minute, because there will be time for more questions, right? I do not want to neglect 9-12. So a handout that we do have that's up here, if you have a young person in 9-12, is this double-sided sheet that just shows some of the changes that we're doing to revise the current 9-12 curricula for this transition year. So again, not necessarily ideal. It would have been great to do a K-12 adoption. To be very transparent, there aren't that many strong curriculum vendors for 9-12 that we're finding for English language arts. So we're hoping that in this upcoming year that there'll be some different resources and options. But if you do have a high school student or are interested, please check out this handout as well. Some of the changes, just high level, that we created or that we did was change some of the order of the core text in high school to have the rigor become more increasingly complex. What we found in that audit is that in some cases, students in ninth grade, for instance, were reading a much more challenging text in the beginning of the year, but at the end of the year it was easier. So if we think about challenging students, by fourth quarter, the text that you were reading should have been on a 10th or 11th grade above, and in some cases it was on a 8th or 9th grade. So we made some of those revisions for this year. Another revision that we made is changing the tasks, the writing tasks that students in high school are engaged in for the current curriculum, just to make those, again, more increasingly complex, varied in nature, so children have different opportunities to express themselves in writing. However, hold me to this, hold our district to this. Beginning at the end of September, we're going to launch our engagement series around a 9-12 curriculum adoption. So we have a little bit more time this year than we did for K-8 to begin those feedback and engagement series and hearing from all of our stakeholders and what we would like to see in a 9-12 ELA curriculum. So make sure that as you are engaging with your schools, following the board meetings, in whichever ways that you receive information, make sure that you don't miss out on those opportunities to get some feedback and input in on the potential 9-12 ELA curriculum. Can I answer one more question, or do we have to wait?
What do you do with children who are not reading on grade level, whether it's 8th grade or 9th grade level, but they're not functioning on grade level?
Yeah, so that's a great question too. So, I guess I need this, sorry. So our core curriculum is intended for whole group, right? And so whether you're reading on grade level or not, it is your right as a young person to have experience and engage with your grade level text. So interventions that schools currently use, accommodations and modifications for our children that receive individual education plans and IEP services, those will still exist. What we don't want to happen though, because when we saw this, is we don't want over scaffolding and watering down the grade level curriculum for any child. So our charge and the expectation is that any child, regardless of their reading level, their disability, their ability, engages in the grade level standards and complex texts. And we, as central office folks, as school leaders, as other support staff, work with teachers to ensure that we are appropriately implementing any kind of individualized education plans, accommodations, modifications, or interventions, in addition to the core.
So my name's Matt. I'm the art department chair and the visual arts teacher at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. This past year I've been lucky enough to actually work with Chanel and help write curriculum for the high school level for our visual arts programs here in the city. So I'm going to talk a little bit about culturally responsive teaching, specifically through the lens of transformative education. So I'm really passionate about teaching as a microphone, as a way to empower students to discuss and explore their identity and grapple with who they are as well as the community that they come from, and explore that through and within their education. This stems from my experiences as a young person growing up in Baltimore. My dad went to jail when I was 11, and I never really felt like school gave me an avenue to work through that, talk about it, process it, question it, and turn it into something productive. So I really think that education is a way to make sense of those issues, and that it has the potential to be that tool for our students if we sort of take a culturally responsive approach. I want to take a second and say that what I'm saying is not the way, right? It is a way that's been kind of came up by Paulo Freire and a few other people, but we're going to hear from a lot of fantastic teachers in a few minutes who have other ways that they're going about it. But the way that I think about it is really summed up by this here, that culturally responsive teaching isn't a teacher working for a student or a teacher working about a student, but a teacher and a district working with students, with communities, with families. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about what it's not. So transformative education came up, a little bit of history, and speaking about how a lot of our education looked. In history, it came up in a direct response to a standardized approach to education, which in a lot of ways was established to help train students as factory workers, to help de-skill and produce populations that were fit to work in factories. This denied students the questioning, problem solving, and critical thinking skills that allow for social mobility, problem solving. Brief aside, I don't think that knowledge is something that should be controlled or given at the discretion of a teacher, right? Standardized education in this kind of lens views it in that way. In their attempts to address and meet the needs of society as a whole at the time, it ignored the individual needs of students and communities. It denied students the opportunities to formulate their own goals, their own beliefs, their own ideas. And I think that this is really important. It encouraged dependency and passivity, as well as distorts a student's view by presenting an absolute truth, right? Which kind of undermines the social consciousness that's needed to bring about change and reform. Next slide, please. So as a result of it, this style of teaching came about called transfer of knowledge approach. Basically, a student, if we think about a student for a second as a receptacle, a teacher puts something in the receptacle, now you've got your knowledge, right? It's a way in which learning and knowledge or understanding is treated as if it's an object to be given to a student, passed down. Oftentimes that's prescribed with little to no input by communities, students, stakeholders, parents. And they're pretty burdensome, right? Mostly because they deny students a voice in their education and therefore they don't work. Wow, just got loud. It continues to produce an enormous amount of student resentment and resistance because students don't feel that they have a voice in their education. And if we look on a larger scale, it produces resistance and resentment amongst communities that the schools serve because communities feel that they don't have a voice in their child's education. Next slide, please. So what is cultural relevance or culturally responsive or reality pedagogy or any of those other ways that we could say it? So it's generative, right? I'm going to stick to this script because I know I've only got like 10 minutes. It's generative. It focuses on large connected themes, and it problematizes ourselves and our context. What I mean by that is it takes ourselves, takes our context, and takes our reality, and it makes that the center of the curriculum. Makes that the center of learning, the center of discussion. So that all of the learning stems out of questioning, criticizing, looking at with a critical lens where we come from, who we are, why we are the way we are, the world that's around us. So in that sense, it's relevant not just to our lives, but to our culture, our communities, and our history. It encourages us to look at ourselves, our community, and our context with a questioning and critical lens. And it's based on a mutual creation and recreation of knowledge. Meaning, if a student is coming with their reality, this can't be something that a teacher is prescribing learning, right? This is something that's mutually happening between teacher and student. Sweet. I'm going to keep going. So transformative education isn't a transfer of knowledge approach, right? Again, it comes in a direct response to standardized methods in education from the 1980s. And since learning is centered around students' context and lived experience, there's no way that it could ever be predetermined and passed down from a teacher to a student. We can have a curricular basis, right? But the learning, the dialogue, the questioning has to come from our students' realities. Chris Emdin, by the way, teaches at Columbia Teachers College, wrote a book about this, centered on reality pedagogy. It's called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. It's a great book. Don't let the title fool you. It's a great book. Great book. So discussion, brainstorming, and research are essential to learning in this kind of process, and they're all, again, grounded in students' realities. Next slide, please. So situating what we do and what we teach and how we teach, not just what we teach, but how we teach within the communities we serve is incredibly important because students don't exist in a bubble, right? They have entire lives and circumstances outside of the classrooms that I occupy and the schools that some of the teachers here occupy. And so contextualizing our pedagogy and student learning within their experiences are essential. To do this, obviously, relationship building is crucial. You need to know your kids. But the other thing that's really important is experiencing firsthand the community that you serve, right? Walk around the neighborhood that you teach in, get your hair cut at the local barbershop, play basketball, go to the corner store, right? If you've got hair, get your hair cut. Mine's going away pretty quick, but, right? Get to know students' realities so that we can better contextualize learning within our classrooms. Next slide, please. This is essential because a student is more likely to be influenced by background discourse than how a teacher teaches, right? Since their background discourse, their reality is their means of deciphering everything. So there's a few tenets here of transformative education. The first is that learning is mutually created. So learning has the potential to be validating, effective, and empowering if it's something that is mutually created between students and teachers. Students' voice must be valued and taken into consideration, right? They're the experts on themselves and their reality. And then as teachers or as a district, we've got the content knowledge. And so it's kind of about working together in a partnership. It's really important to acknowledge and treat students as experts in themselves. Using students' voices, we can develop culturally responsive approaches where curriculum and planning incorporates, responds to, addresses, and translates a student's reality and life experience into relevant instruction and learning. Next slide, please. How am I doing on time? Okay? Cool. So a little bit of in practice, because I know I'm talking a lot of like theoretical. So every year I start my class with a zine project where students are asked to write, draw, think visually about their lives, whatever that might mean, just to tell their story. I don't answer many questions about it. That's pretty much all that I give as far as instruction. Students create these books about their lives, and from then I invite students to become a part of a committee that meets after school. So these students meet once a week, and I choose a variety of students, from students who are in the front of the room who have to beg to talk, right, to students who I would perceive their behaviors to be disruptive, to students who just aren't engaged, right, a very, very broad array of experiences from in my classroom. Those students come and start meeting every week with me after school. What we do is we look at these zines that are made by each student, 180 students, and we look and we start to develop a thematic scope and sequence for the year. We look for connecting themes. This year some themes were home, identity, perception, bias, stereotypes, how we're shown in the media as a school district or as a city, right? Violent crime, the Baltimore Ceasefire Project, things like that. So we take those thematic scopes and sequences and we develop a year-long curriculum. And then as an educator, I step back and then I insert in standards, techniques, skills, all those necessary things. About every month or so, a student will leave the group and invite a friend in. So what that does is it creates always fresh ideas, but also it creates a situation where students who usually wouldn't meet each other and know each other are now interacting with each other in a productive way. So the student who is really disruptive is probably not going to be interacting very often with that kid who's in the front of the room who's like afraid to talk in class, right? So what this is doing is really fostering deep relationships and ownership within the classroom setting. Next slide, please. Learning comes out of questioning ourselves, our surroundings, our experiences, and our world. So these questions generate relevant conversations about our realities and who we are as people. Learning comes out of engaging with different and diverse experiences, right? So every student, regardless of neighborhood, comes with a different experience. They could live in the same neighborhood, they could live right next to each other, they've got different experiences, right? And so every student is coming with different experience, and these differences create questions and problems, which if there's a nurturing, challenging but nurturing environment, will not lead to problems, but it'll lead to deeper understanding, empathy, and learning. So in that sense, learning is socially constructed. A good example of that is all of my students opted to put their zines out on display last year. And so all of these 180 students who are bearing their souls about their lives are now having people read about their lives and learn about them in a way that is really, really vulnerable and real, right? As I've said a few times, it's not passed on, right? It's not prescribed from a teacher to a student. It can't be culturally relevant if I'm coming in and saying this is what you should learn, right? So it's mutually constructed. Again, transfer of knowledge approaches to education deny students a voice in their learning, and they don't work. It's just that simple. They just don't work. Perhaps most importantly, learning is relevant to lived experience. Authentic learning can't and doesn't exist in a bubble. It has to look at, incorporate, and address our whole student, their whole experience, everything that they go through every day. And then obviously all of these things that we've discussed are supported by deep, authentic, genuine relationships between teachers, students, schools, communities, districts, cities, right? Ensuring the right conditions are present to grow individually and collectively is essential. We have to cultivate nurturing, respectful, and challenging environments in order to build those relationships and empower and learn from and elevate our students' voices. Next slide, please. So if we begin to work with, not for, not about, but with our students to create culturally relevant curriculum and to create culturally relevant ways of teaching that view students within their context and encourage them to challenge, to question, and confront their lived experiences, then we will have empowered our students to be confident agents of change that we so desperately need right now in our communities, in our city, and in this country. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Jeffrey Wright, and what you just presented seems to be kind of forward from a constructivist approach to learning. I was just reading some James Baldwin yesterday, Region of My Mind, and he describes in part of the essay living in Harlem and seeing a young man on the corner and believing that was going to be his future reality. So, the way it was presented, it seems to look at reality from a micro standpoint as the individual, but there's also a macro level that encompasses not only the here and now, but also a lineage of historical, cultural, and social devices.
Right.
So often in our community, what appears to be the norm is actually the abnorm. And so we allow children maybe to focus on reality that they see, and they believe it is normal. I guess one of my questions is, how do we let them know that perhaps is abnormal as we show it in relevance to other communities, other cultures? For example, in the Penn North area, the life expectancy rate there is at 62.9.
Right.
And Roland Park is at 81.2.
Yeah, and then if you compare it with like Sandtown, it's even
Right, Sandtown,
right,
Manchester. Yes.
even more drastic. Absolutely.
Right. So you have a 20-year disparity in life expectancy, which is the core. You know, no life, no learning, no anything, right?
Right.
So, you know, that reality, in my opinion, has to be really connected to, and this can be some very touchy subjects here, some very touchy conversations, like why does this exist?
Absolutely.
Unhinged.
Absolutely.
You know, wrong, right? You know,
Absolutely.
exactly. So, again, the whole thing about one reality, it makes sense in the normal sense, right, of living and being. But in the abnormal sense of living, if we contend that that's real, and it's real because you've done something, your parents have done something, and Baldwin was really deep into this, right?
Sure. And Wes Moore says something about it in his book about
Right,
we're the
Wes,
product
yeah.
of others' expectations that we internalize as ourselves.
As
Absolutely.
well, exactly. So, so I guess those conversations
Yeah.
have to be brokered in order for real change to occur.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want it to seem like I'm just like coming in and being like, hey, we're going to talk about this stuff, right? It's planned out. It's thought out. Can you guys hear me? All right. I get super nervous with the mic. I'm not going to do it. Sorry, Natalia. But these are conversations that are planned, structured, thought through with students, right? Not just me sitting in my room saying, all right, we're going to talk about redlining today and why the life expectancy in Sandtown, Winchester is so much lower, right? But these are talked about and broached with students who are doing research, who are doing research, who are learning, who are challenging, right? These aren't just conversations to be like, yeah, let's talk about our reality and then let's let it go. These are conversations to say, this is our reality. Well, why is this our reality? How can we challenge this? How can we move forward? What are some solutions, right? Especially as an art teacher, using design thinking and things like that, I'm in a great position to work with students to challenge those things and create art that processes those things to move forward. So it's definitely not just about being like, this is where we are and this is it, right? It's about saying, this is where we are and let's talk and let's make art and let's process so that there is a pathway forward. Because oftentimes I think the reality exists either way, right? And I think it sends a dangerous message to say, this isn't a place that we're going to talk about that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting, and it gave you a lot of things to think about as a middle school social studies teacher. But what do you say to somebody who teaches, say, pre-K or like, you know, these elementary grades or even a lot of the secondary grades where sometimes what they do need to learn is prescribed from an adult. Like they need to learn
Sure.
how to decode words or do an algebra problem or, you know, kind of the more nuts and bolts. I mean, I feel like you're in a position as a high school art teacher to
Right.
explore these topics.
It's a little looser.
And to a lesser extent, I am as an 8th grade social studies teacher. Like
Sure.
History, sure. But like, you know, there's sort of limits to the approach.
Yeah, my quick answer to that would be that there's a way to walk the line of what is needed as far as standards and prescribed and what is relevant. So for example, I wrote curriculum for the middle school that I taught at prior to teaching at Poly, and in math, they were learning about making inferences, right? And so we were surveying neighborhoods, collecting data, and then making inferences about vacant homes, or measuring in their science classes. They were measuring like lead, parts of lead per watt, things like that. So there are ways to work it in. A lot of people a lot smarter than me have done it.
You learn as a teacher to use your students' experiences and what they're most interested in to guide the curriculum and integrate the curriculum into what they're already putting out there for you. I did a teacher evaluation form with my students, my Upward Bound students this summer. Actually, Jessica's one of my Upward Bound students. And my last question and my teacher evaluation was created by students, so I'm with Matt with creating stuff with your students. And the last question was, what is your favorite aspect of my teaching? Every single student put your ability to build relationships with us and you care about what we're going through. Nothing had to do with academics. And I think when that's in the forefront and you care about what your students are going through, then it builds this trust between you two, and then you can kind of really do whatever that you want them to do once the trust is built. I do think sometimes I have an advantage in the classroom because I'm Black and I'm from Baltimore, and I'm not from, it's two Baltimores. I'm from the Baltimore. Like, I'm from the real Baltimore, not the crafty Baltimore where everything look nice and all that stuff. I'm from the same Baltimore that my students from. I still live there now, so I don't teach my students that's going through all this strife and then go home to my nice, crafty home. It's cool for people that do, because I can't wait till I can get to that point, but I'm not there yet. So I think that creates this, the time it takes me to build trust with my students is shortened because they already know where I come from. They know I know where they come from. And it allows me to talk about some of the things that you presented, sir, with and unapologetically and comfortably. Because the one thing, I would add to what Matt said is not only to explore where kids can go outside of their reality, but to what extent they are responsible for their reality. And that's a conversation that only family can have with each other. And when I say family, I mean Black people. And so I think that it's important that you use whatever leverage you have in your classroom. It may be that you're a man, so you have leverage with your boys. It may be that you're a Black girl from Baltimore like me, so you have that leverage. It may be that you're an art teacher like Matt, so you have the leverage to use art to explore some provocative issues that you would normally not be able to explore. But to put it simply, before I pass it on to Jessica, I would just say that curriculum is not the holy grail, it is your guide. And if you allow it to be a holy grail, you'll miss out on all of the other learning opportunities and experiences that you're supposed to have with your students.
So to kind of piggyback off of what Ms. Brown was saying, I really agree with I really agree with the idea of making the curriculum kind of not the holy grail, because I think the connection between you and your teacher or your teacher and you or whatever, that's really important because so I think that's really important because in order like she was saying, in order for us to actually want to really do something or make us really want to do something, you have to it's kind of hard to get someone to want to do their work if they're completely uninterested, if they're worrying about other things that's going on at home or in their community and things like that. So I feel like me personally, even if you're not a teacher where it's your classroom, you're able to talk about certain things, like Mr. Matt, him being like an art teacher, or like say for instance, like for me, like I had a biology teacher, and she was like, it's biology. You can't really like talk about like current events and stuff like that, like in biology, but like she still kind of made it like so that everyone had a sort of like connection with her, and they knew like, oh, like she cares about me and like my success. So it kind of makes it like easier for us to learn, because it's like, okay, it's not one of these teachers where they're like, oh, let's just work on this and then not worry about anything that's going on. So yeah, that's kind of all. Just gonna
Hi everyone. My name is Nisa Little. I just finished my second year teaching at Edgewood Elementary. So that's right over. That's like by the Walbrook Junction, like literally right behind. And my first year I taught fourth grade all subjects, and my second year I taught, well, this past year I taught fourth and fifth grade literacy, which was totally an amazing experience because I got to strictly focus on literacy and social studies. So in my experience, creating relationships and like the classroom management piece and all that stuff was very easy. You know, they see me and they see their sister or their mom, or, you know, and I went to Western High School, so, you know, I'm very familiar with the area, or, you know, they'll see me out in public and they're like, oh, you go to the mall? I'm like, yeah, you know, I have a life outside of teaching, you know. What was a struggle for me was the content and learning the standards and understanding what those meant as far as me teaching and me modeling skills. So with the curriculum, I had a lot of support because I had an educational associate, so they strictly focused on like working with teachers and developing them and observing them and supporting them, which was amazing, and I feel like I got the help that I needed. But I feel like with the standards, it's pretty much the skill. Like you can grab any text as long as it's rigorous, or you can grab any, because I show videos, we've analyzed art before, compare and contrast certain things. But I really feel like you can grab any piece of literature and model a skill, teach them how to do something, whether it's to summarize or to identify the key details or to compare two pieces of work, two pieces of literature. So with me, like I just found things that I thought would interest them. At the beginning of the year, I did a student survey, and they thought like, yeah, Miss Little just wants to know what I like to do on the weekends. And I'm like, yeah, I do, but you know, I want to know like who's your favorite superhero, or you know, like what type of things do you like to learn about, so that I could later use that to find different resources and then you know teach, because I find that students are more willing to try if at least what's in front of them they're interested. So that has been my experience, and I think it's still ongoing because I feel like the curriculum changes. Even like before Wit and Wisdom, it was, okay, we need to look at these tasks and have them more PARC aligned. That was the big thing, because PARC testing is huge. So I think how I meet students is in whole group, I expose them to the text that's on their level. So whether it's Bud Not Buddy or Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, and then I model the skill for them, whatever that skill is. And then, you know, and it's a give and take. It's not just me up there the whole time talking. But then in small groups, we'll do the same skill, but at a text that's on their level. And usually I group students together that have some similar need. So she mentioned, I'm sorry, Miss Ashley, she mentioned about like small groups, like that's your big bang to really, you know, have 3 and 4 students in front of you versus 30 students in front of you and just working with them on that particular skill. So it definitely has been challenging. I definitely had to review data a lot and adjust my lesson plans and find creative ways to capture my students' attention. But I think it keeps me creative and keeps me on my toes. And I am really excited about the new curriculum because I kind of feel like I was one of those teachers who was struggling to find resources. And your first and second year teacher is like, oh crap, you know, like, whereas though now all the resources are there and now I'm just really internalizing it and then, you know, putting my own spin on it. Yep, that's
Just to piggyback very quickly off of what everyone has said, I really think people in general learn for two reasons. Either they feel a connection with the person or they feel a connection with the content, right? And so I think obviously the goal is that we try to foster both. I think the relationship, like Dante said, the relationship with the person, human being that I get to sit with every day is the goal. It's the most important thing. And from there, everything else follows, right? If you have the relationship with that young person, you'll know what is connected to their lives and what's relevant and emerging from their lives, and you'll be able to cater your curriculum to that. But I think it's important to say, like, the paper or the shared drive or whatever that you're looking at that is your curriculum is not like, it's not inscribed in stone, right? It is a suggestion. It's a, I mean, there's standards, there's things to work through, there are things that are important that students need to know, but you can cater that to your students. You know, that's the goal.
They wanted Tyrone to
Questions?
facilitate.
Question and answer.
And I also wanted to say this, like, in my experience, my principal gives me the autonomy to kind of pick and pull and modify, and she kind of trusts her teachers with that. Whereas though some of my peers, they are at schools where their lesson plans are totally script and you don't read off that lesson. I mean, you read strictly word for word. So I think another thing is like your school culture and how your school leadership is.
Comprehensively, what we haven't defined is that. It's like, what is our shared understanding and our shared approach of what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher? I think that no time more than now is the time for us as a collective district, again, not just those of us who work in central office, but how do we start to create a shared meaning and understanding, definition of when I'm at Booker T, that every teacher at Booker T, the principal, the assistant principal, has the same understanding of what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher than if I went to my former school at Mount Washington, that all of those teachers, that new principal have that same shared understanding. And right now in the district, we don't have that. I am also very optimistic and hopeful. And we do have some, because the conversation has started and it's there, to come, right, beginning this year, is the fostering of those conversations and pulling together teachers like that are on our panel here today, students, parents, to start to create and have that buzz and those conversations around what is, if I send I send my children to Baltimore City Public Schools in 2 years, I want, as a parent, to know that answer. What as a district are we saying is culturally responsive and pedagogy and teaching? And we're not there yet, but it is to come. So I'm going to put not the question back on, but kind of like a charge to all the folks that are in here, that this is what our buzz needs to be. As you are in your schools, as you are at board meetings, as you are talking with your fellow parents and neighbors and community, that needs to be the push. Like, we need to have a shared definition of what it means as a Baltimore City teacher, even if I'm not from Baltimore. I wasn't from Baltimore, but I look like my kids, but it was about relationships though, right? But not every teacher can do that. So what is our definition, and how then are we going to support any educator that is in front of kids to become a culturally responsive educator? So that was the answer to your question, but
it was actually. And my second question is, many of the teachers that I had the opportunity to work with over the years, and even recently had issues around timelines. So by, let's say, January or December, you're supposed to have taught X amount of content. And whether or not the students have absorbed that content, you have to move on because it says that you have to have this finished by another timeline. How does that get addressed when we're looking at the whole issue around this new wisdom curriculum? And how will the children get connected to that?
Yeah. I'm going to answer about the logistics pacing piece and then you can take from it. So that is going to be a huge, pacing is always, we have 180 days. Majority of those days are some form of testing. So the number of real instructional days is always like the elephant in the room. Is that accurate? Yeah. People who are teachers, right? That's like accurate. So I can only speak for ELA and the ELA standards. I think one of the benefits of the ELA standards is that they cycle through. So even if there's only 10 of them, and they're built upon each other. So with ELA, it's a little bit different than math, and I cannot speak for math or science. But there's kind of more room to, if I didn't get that particular standard that was in Module 1, it's going to come back in a future module. I think with Wit and Wisdom specifically, this year, as a first-year implementation, our goal citywide is twofold. One, to ensure that every teacher and leader internalizes the curriculum as it's designed, so just the components, right? So what does it mean? What does this look like? What does it mean? What do these different structures and routines mean? That's all we want people to be able to internalize that. And the other piece is for teachers to be able to prepare strategically. So our messaging to school leaders, because that's where the pacing and the timeline kind of hammer comes down, is that your individual school leader, is to share that with them. And that for this year, as year 1 implementation, pacing, some lessons that are designed for a day might take a little bit longer. I might not get through all 4 modules this school year, but as long as teachers are internalizing the structures of the curriculum, please note that I didn't say that they are making sure that every kid reads this specific text, because it's about the standards and the routines that is going to affect pacing year 1, and that's okay. Because as long as our students are exposed to their grade level standards, and we're making room as educators to build those relationships and build that culture so that they will engage in whatever text I expose them to, that's going to affect pacing, and that's okay. So for year 1, our pacing is going to be an issue, but that's what happens when you adopt something new.
Yeah, I just want to add, that goes back to what I was saying about not allowing the curriculum to be your holy grail. The pacing, one time I only made it to day 6 out of a 35-day curriculum, right? But it was because I was so adamant about my kids mastering these skills. I mean, not the skill of, that's where I messed up. Mastering the themes before we moved on to the next piece, right? And my principal had a real conversation with me. But everybody don't have a principal that's real. And I was one of her first victims. And she said, Ms. Brown, you have to focus on the skill that you're trying to teach the kids, not the themes from the books and the content and all that stuff. So whatever you need to do to get them in, so if the standard is for them to be able to draw evidence from a literary source, right? It doesn't matter what day you want and all that stuff. Make sure that your kids can draw evidence from a literary source. And once she gave me permission, because a lot of teachers don't feel like they have permission, and I think that's something that the district should understand. They don't feel like they have permission to tear apart the curriculum. She gave me permission to do that. She said you put the standards and the skills that you're trying to teach your kids from first. She said go all the way to the back, know what standards are going to come out at the end of this task. Whatever you need to do to get them there, get them there. And once she gave me permission to do that, I became a better teacher.
teach outside and use the outdoors to teach. And I appreciate all of your sentiments as teachers saying to break apart the curriculum and don't use it as a holy grail. And like you said, Ms. Brown, most teachers do. They're like, but I have to do this. Mind you, this is just kindergarten. So they're like, I have to do this. The kids need to do this. And I'm like, the kids can learn how to count to 5 by going outside and counting rocks and sticks and leaves. It's not that serious. It's just kindergarten. But my question was, hold on, where is it? With this new curriculum, Wit and Wisdom, is there, will there be a source online for vendors to go to view it so we can learn what's in there and how to educate teachers, for me especially, how to educate teachers on how to use these standards or meet these standards and would do it outside?
So, all educators can project so yes, in short, there will be resources, and if you want to take one of the just overviews that's called the module synopsis, it shows you all K-8, the topics, the essential question that will be available. That could be a good jumping off point, but yes, there will be resources available. I had mentioned earlier, like with the parent tips, we're still trying to figure out what's the best platform to put that so people can go to it as opposed to going through all of the parts of our city school website. So working with communications to help us inform that. But yes. Thank you.
Is there room in the curriculum development for students to actually recommend books that they indeed find challenging? Because I was looking at the recommended text there, and I don't mean to date myself, but I was reading them when I was in school. So in order to keep the interest level up, I think it's important for students to have some degree of input to be able to recommend books or essays like from Kondwani Fidel or D. Watkins, or there may be a book of poetry by, I can't remember, I think his name is Torre, I can't remember, but is there any sort of avenue where Baltimore City children can include something?
So maybe the district response, and I would love to hear from the teachers, because I think ultimately it comes down to, and this has been repeated over, right? A curriculum is not a silver bullet, it's not the holy grail. The curriculum is the set of texts and resources that are aligned to the standards. That is kind of the standard of care medium. A point of clarity, then I'm going to start with you all, please respond. The document that you're referring to, that's the summer reading list. That's not the core list of texts that are aligned to the curriculum. I don't believe I think it might be in the parent tip sheet that shows you which text will be a part of module 1. But those will be posted as well. So that was just a summer reading list. However, yes, there should be, I would advocate that teachers should be making space for children to have opportunities to suggest other types of texts that we read or we engage in. But that's interesting.
So I definitely agree. I feel like it's on teachers to create that space where your students feel comfortable saying, hey, because I said something about Martin Luther King, and one of my students said, oh, I've never heard his I Have a Dream speech. So I was like, oh, perfect time. The next day I had the speech printed out. It was on the Promethean board. We went through, annotated it, and it became a lesson. So I think as a teacher, having your feelers out there and knowing your students and creating spaces in the classroom where you can do things like that. I know my students personally, like certain people, and they'll say, hey, so-and-so had an interview about this and they spoke on this topic. So then I'll say, okay, and then I'll find some way to incorporate that in a lesson that's tied to a standard, that's tied to a skill. So.
If I can just also throw in, I think my class being based on students' realities, I think it's really important that we have books that are challenging and looking at and confronting and growing from those realities. So we have a classroom that's in my classroom we have a library that's completely stocked by students, filled with D. Watkins, filled with Tanya Hasey quotes, filled with Westmore, filled with Kyle Pompey's new photography book, or Devin Allen's Beautiful Ghetto, right? So there's space for it. It's, again, I think on a district level it's harder to do. I know Dr. Santelises just tweeted about how important that is a few days ago. but I do think that there's a lot of space to do it on a teacher level. It just requires you to really be engaged.